Hi everyone, this is Andrew Primo, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 115 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the second week of May 2024. We're going to talk about the latest updates from the front lines and how the Russians are trying to reach Kharkiv and all the offensive operations of Russians in the Kharkiv region. And we're also going to talk about the Russia's parade in Red Square. And we're going to talk about the aggressor's limits. So, Russian attack on the Kharkiv region on May 10th. At night, Russian troops with forces of up to 5 infantry battalions crossed the state borderline and captured 4 border villages: Streleche, Krasny, Pylne, and Borisivka. In other areas, Russian attacks were repulsed. The enemy suffered significant losses. Insignificant progress was also recorded in the Vovchansk region. The largest occupied settlement is Streleche. This area under the border, except for Streleche, was in fact a gray zone. As it turned out, the defense line was not deployed there, and therefore the enemy managed to create a bridgehead up to 10 kilometers wide and up to 5 kilometers deep on the territory of Ukraine without much problem. The total area of the occupied territory is more than 30 square kilometers, which is approximately 40 kilometers only from the city of Kharkiv. The Russian actions didn't surprise the Ukrainian command, but why the enemy managed to capture such a large territory so quickly with infantry forces is a big question. Of course, the forces there are not equal. Our tactical reserves operate from the depth because the enemy has an advantage in the number of reconnaissance drones and means of destruction, particularly aviation and artillery. However, the offensive had been discussed with for many months, and there was enough time to prepare so the infantry would not march. Thanks to the deployment of our troops and the infliction of the fire damage on the Russians, the enemy's further offensive was stopped. However, the defense organization was effective in some areas, and it was not effective in Streche area. Therefore, the Russian troops tried to advance further. Armored vehicles transported infantry to Russian territory but didn't enter our territory at the beginning of the attack. However, it is obvious that now the armored vehicles will enter to support the infantry's further actions. The enemy advances slowly in separate groups of infantry, each with a platoon size. The enemy also crossed the border in the Vovchansk region. The nature of the enemy's actions is combat reconnaissance carried out by significant infantry forces. So far, the enemy has created a bridgehead for further actions, but the forces for the rapid deployment of the large scale offensive against the city of Kharkiv itself are not yet in the area. So, at the moment, the Russian offensive doesn't pose a direct threat to Kharkiv. There is no threat of a quick capture of the city. For the defense of the city, our command concentrated significant forces, but the situation is very dangerous for the future. So, the situation following the Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region on May 12th has changed a little. Russian troops formed two bridgeheads in the Kharkiv region along the border. The depth of enemy was small, up to 5-6 kilometers, but the Russians expanded the offensive front. In total, unfortunately, in 2 days, the enemy captured about 100 square kilometers of the border strip along the Russian Ukrainian border. The first direction of the enemy's advance near Kharkiv is a ridge of heights near the village of Liptsy, Tirnove, and Staritsa. The second direction of the enemy advance is the city of Vovchansk. The enemy went directly to the outskirts of Vovchansk, was approximately 5 kilometers from the state border. The Russians shifted reserves and used significant infantry and armored forces, a significant number of drones as well. Nevertheless, the Russian troops advance slowly and do not try to break through with large forces in some narrow areas. They create pressure on a wide front and point concentrate forces to attack individual nodes of the defense where it's organized. Ukrainian troops also operate dispersedly on the wide front. The situation is difficult. The enemy has the tactical initiative, but our front is getting stronger. There are problems in several areas of in terms of organization at the higher command level because not everything was properly prepared and checked to repel the expected enemy offensive. So there is currently no threat, as I said, to Kharkiv. The enemy is far enough away, his forces are limited, and there is no rapid advance. The enemy's further advance depends on how heavy the losses will be inflicted on the Russians in this border battle. So on May 13th, the updates for May 13th, the next day, in almost all directions, the Russians tried to advance, but everywhere they met the resistance of the Ukrainian troops, and now the enemy is forced to conduct assaults. During the day, the enemy started fighting in the Khlyboki and Staritsa border villages in the Kharkiv direction, but it was not possible to completely occupy the villages. Infantry contact battles were fought for them. The enemy tried to advance to the village of Lipsy, but could not reach it. In the direction for Vovchansk, the enemy entered the outskirts of the village, but the city remained almost completely under Ukrainian control. So, on May 12th, the Russians attacked for the first time near Vovchansk with several tanks with minesweepers, but the attack was repulsed. On the same day, the Russians tried to advance in almost all directions, but everywhere they met the resistance of Ukrainian troops, and now the enemy is forced to conduct assaults. So, faced with consolidation of our battle formations and the need to attack strong points that hinder further offensive, the enemy lost the opportunity to maneuver. And now the Russian losses began to increase sharply. So, in terms of ammunition, Ukrainian troops are equipped with artillery shells. The US help is coming gradually. In regards to people, the low complexity of the parts cause problems, but the enemy doesn't have multiple advantages. So the battles are going on. Seems like Russians distracted and gathered all its forces and attracted all our forces around Avdiivka and Bakhmut. But that was a very tricky maneuver by the started offensive on Kharkiv because Kharkiv has been massively bombed in the last 2 months, and Ukraine couldn't shut down all the missiles due to the shortage of missiles, the missiles that the Western partners supply to Ukraine. Hopefully, the $61 billion military aid from the US will replenish our reserve and we will be able to defend our cities. So, let's talk about parade in Moscow. It looked way worse than the previous year, and they're gonna look even worse the next year. What it actually tells the world: before full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2022, a Victory Day parade on May 9th typically featured dozens of tanks, as Kremlin thought to showcase its vast arsenal and extol Russia's leading role in defeating Nazis in the World War II. The difference this year didn't go unnoticed, and many commentators poked fun at Putin because this only one T-34 tank, the legendary Soviet tank of the Second World War, was the only Russian tank present at the Victory Parade in Red Square. Several military analysts confirmed that During the last 2.5 years of Russian war in Ukraine, the enemy lost close to 3,000 tanks. The downplaying of Victory Day celebrations in Russia is a personal blow to Putin, who has thought to put the holiday at the center of effort to revive Russian nationalism after the loss of status and perceived humiliations in the early post Soviet period. This approach marked a departure from the Soviet years when the Victory Day overshadowed a number of other holidays, more ideologically motivated ones, such as Labor Day in May and the annual anniversary of the October Revolution. Indeed, during the 46 years between the end of the Second World War and the collapse of the USSR, the Soviet authorities held only three military parades on the occasion of Victory Day in Moscow. The sight of a lone tank in Red Square this week is a timely reminder that behind the facade of oppressive power, Putin's Russia is far from invincible. For years, the Kremlin has sought to intimidate the outside world with carefully staged displays of its military muscles. However, the invasion of Ukraine showed a completely different reality. So, Russian economy and how resilient it is against the Western sanctions. Russia's reserves of manpower and missiles, which seem endless, contribute to to formation of the opinion that Russia is capable of slowly destroying Ukraine. This opinion is supported by reports about the strength of the Russian economy. From the outset of the full scale invasion, one could assume that Russia would cope with economic problems in the short term, but would be peeling up trouble for a long term. Russia more than coped with the situation in 2024 as it benefited enormously from the energy crisis that is actually deliberately unleashed. This made it possible to increase revenues significantly. Currently, the economy appears strong to the rapid and significant increase in military spending. The defense budget, which grew by 70% and now accounts for 30% of the Russian budget and 6% of GDP, provided a huge boost to economy growth. This can be judged by the forecast of the Ministry of Economy of Russia regarding GDP growth for 2024, which increased from 2.3 to 2.8, and by the forecast of IMF from 2.6 to 3.8. Perhaps heard but accusation that the massive economic sanctions agreed by the US, UK, and European Union have not had the desired effect. Joseph Borrell, the European Union's High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, has published a major analysis of the state of the Russian economy. The challenge was to demonstrate that the sanctions have already significantly weakened the Russian economy and the country's future is growing bleaker by the day as Russia continues its war of aggression against Ukraine. The problem with booming defense economy is that it's largely focused on producing products that are quickly snapped up without any long-term benefit to the economy. The cost of foregone benefits are high, much less money goes to education, healthcare, social security, and infrastructure. The boom has pumped money into the economy, but not enough Russian goods are being produced to meet rising consumer demand. They have to make imports, but many of the countries are actually not allowed to export goods to Russia. Therefore, nothing will happen shortly that would force Russia to make fundamental changes in its strategy toward Ukraine. However, the economy is vulnerable and is a limiting factor in the long run. Financing the war, maintaining the standard of living, and maintaining macroeconomic stability will be a difficult task. When returning to a peacetime economy, a hard landing is the quite possible. These factors should concern all politicians who actually care about the future of Russian society and economy, but as long as the country's leaders stick firmly to their current political course, they will resist it. However, the opportunities for expansion of defense productions are small. Some high tech components are still hard to come by due to sanctions, but many older components have been accessed, and even more are coming from China. As before, it is easier for Russia to reproduce old systems than to produce more complex new systems. Huge amounts of armored vehicles and artillery have been lost since the start of the full scale invasion and continue to be lost. To fill the gaps, Russia pulls upgraded replacements from storage and repaired damaged kits. Although, as noted by Walting and Reynolds, the volume of industrial production has been increased to 1,500 tanks and 3,000 armored vehicles, and about 80% of them are not new products, but repaired and modernized examples of Russian military stocks. This may be enough until the end of 2024, but as old stocks are depleted, new cars will have to be produced, and there will be a significantly lower. There is going to be a significantly lower number of them. Similar with ammunition, there is a gap between what the frontline troops need and current production that can be filled from the shortage in North Korea, filled from storage in North Korea. Over time, the situation will not improve. So, and we understand that due to all these examples, we can tell that Russia has a pressure of time, and this will become more critical in the next couple of years. All of this helps explain why Putin doesn't think he has much time left. Last year, he was inspired because he felt that his forces had seized the initiative in Ukraine and that support in the West was noticeably waning. Therefore, the importance of voting in Congress lies not only in providing such necessary assistance to the injured troops on the front lines, but also in a long term commitment to Ukraine. Of course, more effort will be needed at the end of the year, and a Trump presidency is still possible, but Putin cannot be sure that he will come to his rescue. Europe has also stepped up its efforts, and while delays its ramping up production, particularly of artillery shells, are disappointing. The situation is steadily improving. Ukraine is increasing its own defense production and understand that cannot always rely on the Western supplies and significantly increase the production of armored vehicles and anti-tank weapons. It has become an innovative developer and manufacturer of the whole range of drones, producing more than 100 different models, and it has shown how effectively they can be used. While military procurement spending has risen from a pre-war of 1 billion to 1 billion a year to a 10 billion, a serious funding problem remains. Production is unable to operate at full capacity. According to one of the calculations, defense enterprises of Ukraine could produce as much as 18 billion worth of weapons this year, but state appropriations covered only half of this amount. Currently, European countries are trying to finance the increase in production on the territory of Ukraine. Western production enterprises are already being built in the west of Ukraine. For example, BAE Systems repairs bottle damage system for Ukraine so that they do not have to be taken out of the country for repairs, which will take a significant amount of time. Despite the fact that it will be difficult for Ukraine to regain large pieces of the occupied territory for some time, it is showing itself to be more effective in striking targets behind the front line. The campaign in the Black Sea was a significant achievement and removed one of the sources of Russian pressure. Most of the capsized ships of the Russian fleet were forced to return from Crimea all the way to Novorossiysk, and Ukraine is now able to support the passage of 200 ships per month. For Putin, a stalemate is better than defeat, but victory would be better. Early this year, the Russian president has reason to believe he had a path to victory as his troops put heavy pressure on Ukrainian positions along the contact line while the US Congress was paralyzed by split in the Republican Party. This raised the fears that we had reached a turning point in this war, and Russia had more reasons for optimism. So the pendulum hasn't yet swung the other way, but Russia's big push hasn't led to decisive results, and its situation could worsen by the end of this year. So all we need is just another year or year and a half of strong Western support and weapon supplies to totally worn out the enemy. The Ukraine will win. We have no other choice. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, share with your friends.